So again, we're happy to have everybody here to talk about follow-up to capacity charges and load shedding. Just a quick reminder, sort of why we're talking about this. The capacity charge is a pass-through charge for a number of communities, and if it is, you get all the risk or all the reward of reducing that. If it's not, lowering your capacity charge can help you negotiate your next fixed rate contract because the supplier would be taking on any risk of your capacity costs. And the way the capacity charge is calculated, we have your kilowatt demand, which is what you control, your demand at the peak, the annual peak for the system. And then we have the capacity price, which is set by ISO New England. And that, for the folks in the NEMA load zone, is what's going to be doubling next year. So this year it's at $3.43. Next year it's going to $6.66. And that price increase is going to happen next year, and they're going to be looking back to this summer for your kilowatt demand. So reducing this summer is very important. And if you just want to remember where the NEMA load zone roughly is, this map is basically has all the NEMA communities basically inside the blue line there with a red letter N. And in terms of the potential impact, this table just sort of illustrates what capacity charges you could be looking at for a community that has about 1 megawatt of demand, and I think that's a somewhat reasonable estimate for a community that might have high school, middle school, potentially town hall also on those time of use accounts. So in 2015, if you had that 1,000 kilowatts, you would be looking at $41,000. If we go to 2016 and nothing changed except the price being doubling, you're going up to almost 80,000. But if in 2016 you were able to, say, cut your peak demand in half, then you actually pay just about the same that you were paying in 2015. So that just kind of puts into perspective again why we're doing this and why it's important. So what I want to just try to start out with is we'll just take a couple quick polls, see who was doing what there on 720. So I'll try to launch the first poll here. Let's see. All right, so I think the poll should have popped up and looking at did your community load shed on 720? And we'll get a sense. Okay, I'll close that poll. So we had 6 communities that did. We had 1 that did not. We had or 7 communities that did. Hey, all right, nice. And 1 that did not. So this will be good. I think we'll be able to have a lot of sharing at in the discussion piece, and hopefully inspire our friend who did not. And then for those who did, it would be great to know is sort of how many buildings did you load shed at to get a sense of that. So let me open this one up. All right, awesome. So I'll close this, and looks like we had 1 community do 2 buildings, a couple communities do 3, and then 4 communities did 4 or more buildings. So that's awesome. That sounds like you probably had also some diverse experiences amongst actually shedding in each building and what types of measures were used. So we'll look forward to getting into that a little bit later. So we'll dive right in here to the looking at what happened last Monday, and we'll talk then a little bit about some of the real-time tracking tools from ISO, our updated risk thresholds for the rest of the summer, and also before we get to the discussion, I think we'll talk about this Wednesday and Thursday and what people are thinking about. So with that, this graph shows 3 different lines. One is the blue line, the lowest line. That was the original estimate that ISO put out essentially in the beginning of the morning on 7/20. And that was showing a system peak of 24,150 between the hour of 4 to 5 p.m. And later in the morning, ISO updates their real-time, or they basically make an update to their estimates at about 10 a.m. So the green line then reflects their revised estimate, and you can see that they basically shifted that estimate up by almost 500 megawatts, so that their revised estimate was 24,300 between 4 and 5 p.m. And then we have the red line, which is what actually was being reported by ISO minute to minute online. And one important thing to note is that what ISO puts out and the information that we also put out talks about hourly increments. So it talks about that the peak, for example, they were estimating it being 24,300 between 4 and 5 p.m. So that at any time between there, it could hit that level. So there's a bit of mystery about at what point it will actually hit. And when you do open up ISO's real-time graphs that we'll get to later, because they're not exactly sure at what point you'll hit that number for each hour, they basically assume you'll hit it at the midpoint of the hour. So like on this graph here, you can see that they had their peak for both the green and the blue lines happening at 4:30. So they were saying, okay, we're telling you the peak's going to happen between 4 and 5 p.m., which is what our morning emails come out and say, between 4 and 5 p.m. And so when they graph it, they just put it at the midpoint of the hour. So that's just something important to keep in mind, that they're just taking a guess at when in that hour it's going to happen. And so we can see what actually happened on 7/20 here was that the peak happened at 4:50, so really just towards the end of that hour. And then it actually did stay pretty level there. It went down maybe a couple hundred megawatts, pretty flat until about 5:30, and then it started to really tail off. So one of the things I think looking at this graph shows us is that as you do approach that peak, the curve kind of really flattens off, and that I think, as we'll hear from some people, starting your load shed an hour or even maybe hour and a half or 2 hours early can be a good way to be a little cautious, because you're not sure, with the curve flattening out, a change of 500 megawatts here or there could mean the peak could move an hour early or an hour back. And in this case, we see that the real-time data tracked pretty closely to what ISO was, their updated estimate was, and then, but then you saw that the actual load sort of after the peak stayed high. In general, when we've looked at ISO's data this year, they tend to make a conservative estimate, so we tend to see the actuals coming in below what they estimated, but we haven't had too many of these really hot days. So in this case, in this really hot day, the actual went higher and exceeded it. So that's sort of a good look at what happened on 7/20. And this next graph I want to show, if Kate Crosby is on and unmuted, I'd love her to explain this graph that she took from her energy management system.
Hey there, I am here, and I remembered to unmute. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hey, I need to preface this by saying that we're in a really unusual situation in a couple of ways. And our three largest buildings are on a central campus, and there's a fourth smaller building there as well. And that campus is primary fed, which means we receive electricity at a higher voltage, excuse me, for a slightly cheaper price, and then we step it down on campus and distribute it on the campus. So what that means is that NSTAR owns just one pole for the campus, so they can't see the buildings. Excuse me. The only thing they can see is this 1 meter on the edge of the campus. So we, before my position began, the director of facilities was approached by ENERNOC, who was beginning their marketing campaign to do demand response, and this would have been 6 years ago now. And the facilities director signed us up with ENERNOC for the demand response program because they were going to offer a small payment to be on the roster. They were going to offer a small payment for each event. But the thing that he was most interested in was that they were going to, for the very first time, put these sub-meters on the buildings for free and deliver data. So it was the first opportunity for us to actually see what our buildings were doing. Now, most of you will have been getting building-level information right along. You have a long history of monthly bills for your buildings. That's never been true for us until we started this contract with ENERNOC. And although ENERNOC is no longer offering in the demand response market in ISO New England, we continue to have a relationship with them so that we can see the buildings, because otherwise we don't have any way to measure what's happening and whether our efficiency measures are working or anything else. So that's a long preface to say that's why I could actually sit on the 20th. I could sit on July 20th and watch what was happening in pretty close to real time in each of our buildings, and I know that's an unusual window, so that's part of why Patrick thought it would be useful for me to share this. I pulled this together and sent it out just to the facilities folks after the event and the superintendent. So what it shows is, can you see my cursor if I move it? Probably not.
We cannot, no.
Okay, great, super. So at the dark blue largest line drops sharply at about 2 o'clock, and the turquoise line drops sharply at about the same time. And those are actually occupied shifts in the occupied schedule. So that's the end of summer school, for instance, and units being shut down per the occupancy schedule. If you move to the right, though, the boxes with yellow arrows are pointing at shifts that happened as a result of the load shed. So you can see I've drawn a red line to say that we were at 600 kilowatts of demand when the load shed event began. And the first building that drops is that big blue one, which is our high school. And then the much smaller green and red buildings drop, and then the turquoise building drops. And I was saying to Patrick that I know that our HVAC guy was on the roof of RJ Gray, which is the green building, literally turning off. There were two guys up there throwing switches and turning off rooftop units. And I was like, come on. I was actually wishing they had started a little earlier because I was worried that the peak was going to happen 3 to 4. And we were going to be caught if that was true, because the turquoise building, there are 2 air-conditioned buildings, which you can guess are the 2 highest profiles on this chart. So the turquoise building is also 100% air-conditioned. And so Dave didn't get over to the chiller until 3:30, which is when that turquoise building suddenly drops. That's the moment that he turned off the chiller. It's sort of incredible. And I was getting a report that he was on his way, and so that went off at 3:30. So you can see that steep cliff there. The result was that by 4, we were pretty effectively powered down, and that's all we did was to send the word out to the key facilities people. We did not do anything more wide in terms of communication, and I know other people did other things. I'm interested to hear about that. That's the way that we handled it for this one. And the result was that we, by turning off the big equipment, we dropped demand from 600 kilowatts to 223.
Awesome. Kate, so this is great to have, and definitely folks I know many people are probably very jealous of this beautiful graph. We're going to talk about at the end ways to get data like this, and also like this but not quite real time, that we can get from the utilities through programs they have, or by working with someone like ENERNOC or a third party. And
Patrick,
yeah.
may I add, because ENERNOC is no longer in the demand response market in ISO New England, we are now paying hard cash every month for this, and that's not what we wish to be doing, but it is the access to the building data is critical for us for applying for good communities grants and everything else. So just so people understand that we're regretfully in a position where we're having to pay for this information that lovely information that you see in there. So.
Yep, that's good. And Kate, what I just did also, I think this is accurate. You'll see this pop up on the screen. I just made a little calculation for what Kate essentially just saved the community, or what the community just saved, if that was in fact the peak day. So using what next year's price will be, if it had been at 600 kilowatt hours, it would have been about $48,000, but dropping down to 223 by the peak brought you under just over 18,000. So there's some big yearly savings to be had by doing that, which is pretty awesome. And I think this is a good example too of you guys were powering down a little bit early to be sort of make sure that you were powered down before the peak. So it's really great to see this kind of thing. And then I know you also messaged back out to everyone afterwards, sort of showing them this graph, showing them all the good work that was done. So I think on the communication side, that's really important to close that feedback loop, to congratulate people, and then if you do have the data, to be able to show them. So Kate, is there anything else you want to say on this before we move on?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to talk about ISO's real-time tracking tools a little bit, because when we talk about the updated risk thresholds, I think one of the things that can be helpful is knowing, you want to potentially be in a place where you could make a decision right early in the morning and let everybody know, but potentially you might find yourself in a place where you think like, I'm not sure if I want to call it right now, and you want to stay on top of it a little bit throughout the day and maybe make a call a little bit later. So the first place to go is always go to ISO's homepage. It's iso-ne.com, and they have this big button called the Morning Report over on the right. And if you click that, that brings you to the Morning Report. And the bottom picture here shows sort of the menu on the left side of the Morning Report, and it has the 3-day system demand forecast. When you click that, it gives you the hour-by-hour estimate for each of the 3 days, that day and the next 2 days. And it is updated at like 6 a.m., but then at 10 a.m. So that's where my updated ISO estimate line came in. So that when my email is coming out around 8:30, between 8:30 and 9, you can then come back and look at it around 10 or 10:30 to see if they've looked at the forecast and made a different prediction. And if you want to actually get to the real-time graph, again on the home page, here's iso-ne.com. They have this graph, but you can't get the peak information off of it right there. So you go to the bottom right and click on More Real-Time Data. It brings you to a big old dashboard, and there's all these little rectangles of tools. And over at System Load, you just click the little arrow in the top to expand it, and that brings it into its own little box like this. And then you can mouse over either line, either the blue line, which is the forecast, and see exactly what the peak is that they're forecasting, or you can mouse over the orange line and see what the actual is. So, good tools to check in on the updated forecast. We definitely know they update the forecast at 10 a.m. They may come back and update the real time later in the day. They don't promise they'll do that, but it's possible they will. So it can be good to check that, and then you can be watching where the orange real time line is going, and if it's you never know what's going to happen to it next. It could precipitously increase or decrease, but that may help you as well make decisions about what to tell your facilities folks. So in that context of using those tools throughout the day to sort of monitor things, what we wanted to provide an update on was sort of the new risk thresholds given the way the summer's gone. So we initially started off with this idea that 24,000 megawatts was our magic number, and now that we've had a peak that was over that, it was 24,300. What we have decided to do is that we'll use the highly likely moniker if it's projected to be at or above that number. Whatever the highest it has been so far this summer, if it's at or above that, will be highly likely. Then we're going to change the likely moniker to a big old think. This is what we're going to do is we've looked at ISO's data. They tend to make conservative estimates, so they tend to be the actual tends to be lower than what their estimate is. But when the estimate when the actual does exceed the estimate, when it goes over, there's about a 2% differential there. So what we're going to say is that if it's within 2% of the highest we've seen, we're going to give you a big think. And you can decide, throughout this whole thing, you guys are deciding what to do. But we just want to really highlight that as it's within the margin of error. It's lower than what we've had, but if ISO's off a little bit, which they occasionally are, we could go higher. And so you really want to just think about your own capabilities and what to call. That could be a day to wait till the 10:30 sort of updated forecast comes out, and see if you think you want to call it. So, and then if we'll call it unlikely if it's sort of lower than that 2% range, and that way hopefully we'll be able to sort of apply this to the rest of the season. So if Wednesday or Thursday are a new peak, we'll just kind of keep applying this same process. And so right now as of today, highly likely would be anything over 24.3, and our think threshold would be over 23.8, and then below that would be unlikely. So, and I'll continue to kind of keep giving a little color commentary at the top of these things, but that's sort of where we were planning to go with it. And so with that, I'd like to ask for any questions on the thresholds or on how ISO's making their estimates. And we can also talk about, before we get into the other questions, but about people's approach to Wednesday and Thursday this week. I think, that's the next. So if folks want, let me see, I'll see if I can open up the chat here. So if anyone wants, I did get one question in the chat, if anyone wants to get on the alerts, just email me, and I will put you on the daily alerts so you can get on there. Feel free to jump in with any questions. And if not, what I might ask is I'm going to pick somebody randomly here. Let's see here. So
Patrick.
Maybe, yes.
This is Jillian from Natick. How are you?
Hey, Jillian.
Hey, I have a question for the group. So I was wondering I'm here with our facilities director, Jim Kane, and we were wondering what kind of actions did people take to load shed? So Kate, you were saying that you had people up on top of roofs turning off equipment. Are there any maybe less drastic measures people took, or what kind of strategies did you use to continue operating buildings while shedding load?
And this is Patrick. I'm just going to jump in. That's a great question. I'm going to put the pause on that for 1 second, because we will get to that very shortly. But just for right now, if we've got any questions on how ISO does their estimates or how we were assessing the risk.
I got a question about how they assess the estimates or the peak. I mean, I'm from Brookline, and I have an energy management system, so I make some adjustments as well, like some of the other folks. But I'm trying to understand, we had a day of measure on the 20th. Does that mean, so now you're saying there's going to be another date, so is that going to replace the day that already took place, and there's going to be another correction? I mean, how does this continue on?
Yes, it's a great question. So Yeah, essentially, we you never know what the peak day was until the summer's over, and we can look at that's the tricky thing here, and so we know that so far, yes, last Monday was it. Looks like this Wednesday or Thursday will be higher, and we'll replace that, and the way we're trying to assign these risk thresholds is to not trigger too many false alarms. So
if you were an energy hog on the 20th, not doing your job, but then somehow some equipment broke down on the worst day, you look like a hero, even though you screwed up earlier, right?
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is if you forgot to, if you couldn't act on the 20th, you may get a second shot at it here this week. Exactly. Right. And we've, looking at the past data, really like mid to late July has been when the peaks have happened. Last year we had a cooler than average August, and who knows what will happen this year. So likely that we're probably in the thick of it now, and but we'll have to see what August holds for us.
Okay.
Maybe I'll ask this to Kate right now to start us off. Kate, looking at Wednesday and Thursday, are you guys planning to load shed both days, given that, and just for everyone else on the phone, Wednesday is looking right now like 24,500, and Thursday is at 25,000. So that's within 2% difference of each other. So it's a little tough to know necessarily which of those days will be the peak.
Well, so what's happened so far is that JD Head, as Director of Facilities, has texted the same sort of core facilities people and said potential load shed Wednesday and Thursday, stay tuned. So that's all he'll do for now. And he did, when I sent out this write-up, he was pleased with that, and he said next time maybe we'll do something more public. So that's a really different approach than what Ruthie Bennett has done, for instance. So every time you are public about changing the settings in a building, you have the potential to spark a lot of feedback about that. Choosing my words carefully, and I think JD was choosing to be not have a big, wide public conversation about this because he was hoping to not have to contend with a lot of feedback, not on the 20th, but on every day after that, when somebody might think that we were monkeying with the settings to save money. So he was just not wanting to have a lot of those conversations over and over again.
Sure.
But I think it'll be interesting to see as we go forward. I will take this moment to say as well, because we were demand response customers already, there were 3 years there where we were engaging in demand response events when Enernox signaled us. So the crew has had some training on that, so that's been very helpful. And so that's the MO that we know, as opposed to thinking about it in a different way. That was easy to sort of reach for the history that we have and say we're going to do just what we did before, instead of crafting a different kind of a way in.
Great.
So that definitely influenced the choices that were made.
Okay. So you guys are still kind of waiting to see. People are on alert, waiting to decide. Susan McPhee, I see you're on. Have you guys made a decision or not, or where you're leaning towards maybe doing either load shedding both of those days or just one of those days? Susan's staying quiet. All right. Well, if anyone else has any thoughts, I'd love to hear if people are planning. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Mark Sacco from Brookline. Question about the methods I've used was adjusting like water temperatures on chillers, adjusting large air handling unit discharge set points, just to decrease the load a little bit on our end. Whatever we could do, that was ultimately helping us out, and I sent a notice out to everyone, all the building users, of the intentions and the what do you call, the impact it's going to have financially, which is substantial for the public buildings. But I had an idea to make things better, and I wanted to run it by you or some of the other folks. I was thinking, what if we turned the equipment on? We ran the building's coolers, got an early start to get them really nice and comfortably cool. And then as we approach the peak hours, that's when you start to do your trim, and and my thoughts are, it won't be as noticeable and as drastic when you're playing as a day when you're playing catch up all day. And then you make adjustments. It's like rubbing salt in the wound,
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction is that sounds like a great idea to do a pre-cooling. Has anyone else tried that on the phone? You may have struck an innovative approach here, Mark. But I think that probably is a really good idea if you want to possibly minimize those complaints. Is getting the building a little cooler ahead of time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a solid idea. Let's see, and then so I guess I think we're sort of starting to mosey into the discussion period. So if anyone does also as Wednesday and Thursday approach. If you feel free to use the forum we've got to share what you're maybe planning to do, it could be helpful for others to know, or give them the confidence to maybe call load shed day if they weren't thinking of it. So I think we'll just start off with our discussion here, and the first one was what I want to cover. We'll do communication strategy. When did people start and end? What measures were implemented? The challenges, and how are we tracking the impact? And we'll get to some of the utility programs for tracking the impact. But maybe first for communication strategy, why don't Mark? Do you want to start off and let us know how you communicated the load shed and who needed to be involved in Brookline's case?
Well, basically, my communication went out to all the building staff and the building users, most of the building users, just to let them know what was going on. Like, for instance, we had public safety, we had the town hall, a high school, a large library, and a health department. So all the staff in there I notified, letting them know the intentions and the reason behind it. And then, as I said, I tried to just make some adjustments that I felt wouldn't be as drastic, because I was already getting a lot of complaints that day. So what I was able to do was make changes on my energy management system, make adjustments that I didn't have to send people down and turn things off physically. I just made adjustments here on things. At first, I started load shedding, which was like a round robin, you're off, you're off, you're off, and I was getting whacked with calls, just because of the when you shut a piece of equipment off for 5 minutes, really like a 15-minute with all the time delays. So I was already getting whacked from people just noticing like a 3-degree difference, because these people are spoiled. So I had to come up with some different strategies, and like I said, I made some. On a lot of our equipment is variable air volume. I made some discharge set point change. In other words, normally it would be a 55-degree discharge set point, and I raised it up to 65. So the equipment was able to work with less of a struggle and run at a less reduced load, and hopefully to reduce our demand. So I'm going to be a little bit more creative this time. Like I said, I'm going to, the next 2 days, I plan on just starting the buildings a few hours earlier, like at 4 in the morning, to get them nice and cool, and then keep an eye on things. What you just demonstrated here to try to, what is the actual limit that we should be looking for that's going to indicate, we're within, I didn't quite understand that number that you're looking for, that threshold that I should be, the 25, was it 25? What's
So essentially we won't know what the peak is until like the day's kind of over. But I think if you see if you see it being highly likely, that means that ISO is projecting to that day to be higher or higher than we've had all summer. But if it's a little bit lower than that, we might send out that sort of think, which might mean that it could be, there's a little error, it could be up there.
So those are the two things.
Yeah, those are probably really the two key points to look at.
Right.
Yeah. So did you find that you got less that by changing the set points you might get less complaints than just turning it off completely?
I thought so. Especially, I think what really helped was the memo, the email to everyone. Once I described the reason for and the impact it had, I got a lot of positive feedback from some people who were on board with it that understood. So communication I think is key.
Excellent. Well, sounds like you had a pretty good strategy there. If anyone has something, I think, for any of this stuff that you feel like would be add or a good tip or a question related to it, I would say jump in. And if not, we can kind of move to the next question. But I'll give people a moment to jump in on communication strategy. All right. So this could be sort of a quick one. I was curious, like when people started, probably mostly started their load shed. So let's see. I think Kate, you had said you guys started about 3 o'clock. Was that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so you guys started at 3, which was technically, we knew the peak would be between 4 and 5. So you were basically going about a solid hour before it potentially
except
could
I knew it could also have landed between 3 and 4, so it was making me uneasy. I was wishing we'd started earlier.
Okay, well that's good to know. Did anyone start earlier?
I did. I started around 2 because I wasn't sure. I was getting mixed feedback. I didn't have the website information that where I should be looking. So I was kind of like going on with other people in the town was speculating. So I just kept it that way through the night. So
nice, yeah. And I mean, really, at 2 o'clock, if I look at the graph here, ISO was predicting it to be 24,100, and the peak was only 24,300. So that was. Yeah, I mean, it's within the error there, so I don't think you were, I don't think that was necessarily, too conservative. That was probably a fair thing to do in this. You heard Kate say she was hoping to start even earlier. Anybody cut it real close and, load shed at 4:30 with the peak at 4:50? Okay. Sounds like we have some very good planners here. All right, nice. So I'm glad to see people gave themselves a good, comfortable margin. So I think the biggest question on people's mind is what measures were implemented. And Mark, I think you were mentioning that you changed water temps on the chillers, AC set points. Kate, I think you were mentioning that you guys actually just turned off some of the AC units. So clearly, air conditioning is a big piece of this. Were there some other interesting measures that people used out there? I don't know if it's lights or computers or other things that were turned off or regulated down.
Patrick, this is Jillian. I think I told you this. We, at several of our buildings, have some pretty large generators. And, Kate, we were actually using those previously as part of a demand response program as well. So at those buildings, we were able to turn the generators on to reduce the electricity we needed from the grid. So that made a big difference at those buildings.
Oh, wow. That's great. Thanks. Excellent. Anything else out there or any unique buildings that did have an unusual load shed ability? Did anyone send people home at either, whatever staff were working there? Did anyone actually essentially really go full bore and close the building down? Well, I will say that Winchester, I know Susan McPhee did this. I think it's Winchester, not Woburn. But they had been load shedding for the last couple years. And so they had already been practicing, a good load shed reduction. So this year when they were planning and looking at that capacity price increase coming from ISO, they were trying to figure out, well, what can we do now? Because we've already been either turning off the AC or turning it up and taking those big measures. So Susan told me that that the town manager decided that they would essentially have like a snow day and send people home, which is what they did. Which is kind of a big thing. But when you start doing some of the math out, it can really add up. So I would encourage people, if you were thinking about that, maybe to talk to Susan about that. It's a big step for sure, but she worked with the town administrator and or town manager, and sort of had discussions ahead of time about how are we going to do this. So they were able to, everybody sort of knew what was going to happen that day. And we did have some questions from folks about some challenging. And Ruthie says. They sent all admin staff for the school district home at 1 p.m. All right. So that's Arlington. So they also took that step. So, not an outrageous step necessarily for the savings that could be had there. I know some people, this sort of goes into the next piece on the challenges. I had questions from people about what do I do about my server rooms, which need to be kept cool, and I was wondering if anyone had thoughts on server rooms. I was hoping maybe most server rooms are on their own zone, so you can stop cooling the rest of the building but keep the server room cool. But I'm curious how folks dealt with those, since they're quite big heat sinks.
Patrick, this is Martha in Melrose.
Hey.
Can you hear me? So
yeah.
That was one of our concerns in the middle of the load shed last Monday, was the server rooms, and it turned out in the end that they are, most of the rooms in the buildings are on their own zones and have their own systems that we didn't touch, because the IT staff tracked the temperatures in those rooms throughout the event and found that they stayed cool.
Oh, so were you saying they stayed cool even though you turned the?
No, we didn't touch those specific zones. We didn't turn anything down, because their case was the cost of replacing blown equipment was going to far exceed anything we'd saved that day for for those few rooms.
Great. Yeah, I talked to our IT staff, and I think it's a pretty low tolerance for what those rooms can bear. Yeah, in terms of the equipment in those rooms. Nice. And Martha, just going back to the measures, were most of your measures doing AC work, or was there anything?
We didn't do any lighting or anything the last time.
Okay, great.
I'm not sure what we're going to do tomorrow or the next day yet.
Yeah. Do you feel like in your community there's appetite for doing 2 days in a row, or do you feel like you almost have to choose one given what's the climate?
I think we'll do both, and I think this time we'll track it the real time on the ISO website, see if we can get a little bit closer, estimating when the event's going to take place. I think that last Monday we shut things down around perhaps 1 or 2 o'clock. I'm not exactly sure. It was being remotely controlled. I'm not the person who was doing it was on vacation, so I haven't touched base with her since she got back. But it got pretty warm by 3, 4 o'clock. It was really warm in City Hall.
The complaints started coming in?
Yeah, especially from all the department heads who were stuck in one room together.
Nice. Okay, well, that's definitely helpful. And hearing from Ruthie that they in Arlington are probably only going to do Thursday because of the disruption for their staff, and they're probably going to do it later in the day. And so I think that might be, again, Arlington had sent the admin staff for the school district home at 1 before, so it sounds like they may do the same, but just push that later in the day. And I think that for both picking up on Martha's point and to Ruthie's point about the timing, that if you are in a position where, the people who that actually implementing the shed can be relatively quick, I think you can push your decision making later into the day. It sounded like with Kate, she was talking about, Dave had to actually go over and throw the switch on top of a building. She has a time delay issue where you actually have to get somebody over there to do something. But if you do have, Mark, you were talking about your EMS system, if you can control a lot of that pretty quickly, I think then you can move decision making later or the actual implementation later if you want. Again,
yeah. Like I said, I think I'm going to get an early start on both days, just run an early start schedule, and then go on the website and see if there's opportunity or if there's a need to do it, and then I'll react, I guess the key is knowing the reaction time. I just don't want to get into the habit every time, I like to minimize these, the amount of time to put this in use unless there's a way I could automate it.
No, and I think, so far, we've had one this summer. We're looking at probably another 1 or 2. And it is hard to tell how many we'll ultimately have, but I think given the way we've set this up, I think, hopefully we'll have, it would be great if we just had, maybe these 2 and then maybe, 2 more with maybe a little heat wave in August. So we'll have to see, but that's where ultimately is each community's decision to have to make that choice about when to do it. And someone else had asked about police stations. I don't know if anyone has a thought about how to load shed at a police station.
That's tricky. The only thing you can do with police stations maybe is put arc sensors and try to reduce the load that way, because they're there 24/7 in most cases, in a lot of cases.
And they complain more than anybody else.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so that may be a place that is tough to do that in.
The arc sensors I've been successful with, and that basically unoccupies the zone and reduces the load on the entire system. So if the building's only half occupied, you only need to condition half the area, and so you're doing good.
Oh, yeah, that's a good tip.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
No, so we've been looking at our police fire building, which is a combined building, which makes it even more expensive. And in our police station, we have a holding cell, and we have 12 cells, and it's primarily unoccupied. And I was just thinking ahead of, we won't be able to have occupied sensors in there for the summer, but even with our library, and there's sometimes there's zones and buildings that we know are the most expensive to heat or cool, and if they are unoccupied, maybe that is a place where you can say, is it unoccupied, and you flip the switch a la Kate, but just as a human sensor for that day.
Yeah, that's a great thought. And just another couple data points. Susan jumped in to mention that Winchester did their shed last week at 2 p.m. So they were also sort of like Mark, fairly early, and they closed their library, town hall, and DPW. So as she did do the close. And she said that they haven't yet decided if they'll do both days this week or just one. They're going to look at tomorrow's data and see what the scoop is. And also suggested I stress the key being communication, and that when you do communicate, if you can also tell people how much money is on the line, that can be really helpful. So for her, she knew it was about $50,000 plus or minus, and so. Yeah, I'll circulate this presentation, but it is. I had some calcs in the beginning, and for Kate, it is not too hard, and especially if you had talked with your supplier already or your broker to get what your kilowatt demand was last year, then you can just actually put in that price that we have and multiply it out, and you multiply it by 12, and there you go. So I think that's a great point. Is not just communicating about the time and what to do, but letting people know the amount of money on the line is great. What I want to make sure we get to here with a few minutes left is how to get your data. So then people can jump in with other questions. But both Eversource and National Grid will give you free data. They'll give you the 15-minute interval data for your time of use accounts for free once per year. So they will give you just a data dump and an Excel sheet of per account every 15-minute interval. So you can see if you wanted to do this, say, at the end of the summer, you could then look back and see on the peak day, at the peak hour, what were you doing. You can also subscribe to the system they have called Energy Profiler Online, and it's $161 per account for Eversource per year. For National Grid, it's $154 per account for the first one, and then $76 per account thereafter. So with Energy Profiler Online, they will load up your 15-minute interval data, but it's not real time at all. It will happen probably monthly. So if you're towards the end of the month, they may update it very quickly, but it could be a while. So it's a nice way, again, to be able to look back and have a tool. You can also they have a bunch of graphing things in there where you can compare your average for a typical weekday to what happened on that peak day. So having that tool, I think, can help you. In addition, sort of going beyond just getting the free data dump, it can help you do some of the math to show the impact that you had, especially compared to what maybe a typical day would have been in July for you. So, and if you are interested in that, definitely talk to your whoever you talk to for energy efficiency, your sort of account manager, and they'll be able to get you started on that. You can even do like a 2-week free trial, I think, with both utilities, so you could test that out. But then the next sort of level up is that with both utilities, you could install a pulse meter interface, which would allow you to install your own third-party meter reader, basically, that could hook up to your EMS system, and then you could be having your real-time data as it's happening, essentially what Kate has. So they have an installation fee per meter. So Eversource is $207, National Grid is $167, and but then the cost to integrate it with your EMS and whatever equipment you need to put on that would plug into that pulse meter interface would be extra charges. And so, as Kate mentioned, she's paying a monthly fee to Enernoc, and I think there may be some other options out there in addition to Enernoc. So that can be, and I'll send out some links to where these prices are posted and afterwards. But definitely, I would talk to your vendor. I know, Martha, if you're still on, I think you are starting to explore integrating with your EMS system. Is that right?
Well, we have been. I thought you said Mark. All right, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mark.
Martha, go ahead.
No, go.
No, I thought he meant, who are you talking about? Which one did you want on? Who did you select here?
Well, Mark, here, why don't you go, and then we'll turn it over to Martha.
All right. Well, I mean, we've had energy management systems for quite some time. There have always been some designed load shedding programs in there, but this is different now, where we seem to be getting. I mean, we were initially doing peak demand, just trying to keep our peak in general down. But that could have its headaches over time. I mean, you got to explain that to people constantly when this is happening constantly. But something like this here, I think, is doable because, like you said, there's an opportunity to give everyone a heads up, make an announcement, and figure ways to try to make it as least uncomfortable as possible and to save the most. I mean, I think if you can send people home and shut the building, I mean, I think that was the best idea you could come up with, because that's going to pay dividends for sure, like a snow day. Although I don't know if you're going to convince the people that are paying summer programs at their high school for their kids to have to go home and now hire babysitters. That isn't going to work. But as far as staff in the municipal buildings, it's a good idea, but it's a tough one, because now you got to explain to contractors why they can't pull a permit on a snow day in the summer. So
yeah,
there's a lot of challenges.
You're right, a lot of challenges to think through for sure. And Martha, so yeah, you investigating the EMS system?
Yeah. So just two things. We did not touch our library, or we have one school, air-conditioned school, that is full of kids all summer. And from what I understand, we didn't touch that building either, because these are a lot of kids who are probably going home also to very hot homes. So this is, being able to be at school all day is their one opportunity to cool off in these camp programs. But in terms of what I really want to know is be able to figure out how we're doing. So we have a new integrated energy management system in 12 of our buildings, and at our 3 G3 accounts, we're National Grid. I know I have a couple of pulse meters there from an old demand response program that I just need to hire the controls contractor. I've asked them for a price to connect those existing pulse meters into our EMS, and they've even offered to write the reports that we could just, have loaded into our system and track what's going on in real time. So I just don't know what the cost is going to be.
Do you have any ballpark sense on that? Okay.
No, but maybe a couple thousand for their programming and time for a day or two. I'm just not sure how long it would take them to connect. And I don't know whether you connect to multiple pieces of equipment or I don't know enough about how it works yet. Till I get the proposal.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I'll follow up with you on that, and as we learn more, we can let people know. But yeah, so this could be, I think, definitely take advantage of your free request probably at the end of the summer, so you can look back and figure out exactly what your demand was at the peak. But yeah, probably check out Energy Profiler online, and maybe even get if you have an EMS system, like Mark, in your EMS system, do you have insight into real-time electricity use?
I do in a few buildings, not all of them. It just gives you the kilowatt hour at the time. So I can actually see a reduction as I make an adjustment. But not at all the buildings. So that's something we're looking to put into all the building energy management systems.
Oh, great.
And that's why I was interested. If you can send that link, I wouldn't mind having, because I got some old legacy pulse. I don't know how accurate they are. And, the trick about getting a pulse, you got to have the right pulse, and you got to have the energy management system translating that pulse into what the actual is. I mean, so you kind of got to have two people on board knowing what they're doing together to make the final end result.
Yeah. No, that's true. And I just want to say thanks to everybody for jumping on today. And I will circulate a list of who was on and emails so people can chit chat. We've kind of been using the forum, but forums are a little clunky. and sometimes email can just be nicer to email people. So definitely want to encourage people to just have good discussions and bounce ideas off of each other. That's what this was meant to do, and hopefully we generated some new insights or at least got you excited or gave you some ideas for things to do. I'm really glad that so far people have been out there and taking action, which is great.